All right, last time we were talking about how I would be going into this lesson, talking about these three civilizations here: the city-states of Sumer, Kingdom of Akkad, and the Babylonian Empire. There are a heck of a lot more that we're skipping over that I'm not going into. I mean, this is thousands of years that there have been organized civilizations in this area. They're quite dominant. And it's one of those things where if you want to know more, definitely look it up. Or like the idea of taking a class in college on it. Look up videos you might be able to find on YouTube if this area interests you. But the reason why I'm choosing these three areas of Sumer, Akkad, and the First Babylonian Empire is there's certain concepts that go around all three that, well, you could say stick with us today. Like, we learn certain things about civilization from these three that you can find in pretty much all other civilizations. With Sumer, it's just the idea of like the first time we see an organized society. How did that come about? And moving on from here, and I'll just bring all this up right now. But simply put, with the Sumerians, they started with, if I'm remembering correctly, 12 initial cities. So these are the idea that you already have settled communities, you already have cities or centers of trade starting to build up around them, and they're starting to have this identifier, like they're identifying with their city. In a way, you kind of wonder why those aren't called civilizations. Well, we just don't have writings about them just yet. But we know that, at least with the Sumerians, you have 12 cities, established cities, in the area of the lower part of Mesopotamia, towards where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers converge. Today, that's present-day southern Iraq and the country of Kuwait. Around that area, essentially, if that's giving you a good idea, at least geography speaking. Blah, can't speak right now. But they decide, you know what? For mutual trade and protection, we're going together, meaning we're going to combine our armies in a way. We're going to make sure that trade is just, we have free trade going between everybody. That will increase everybody's standard of living this that much more, and we'll be able to keep off anybody that wants to come in and just take over our stuff, jack our stuff. Most notably, hunters and gatherers. They're still around. It's not like you have civilization come in and hunter-gatherers disappear. I mean, still to this day, we still have groups of people that can be considered hunters and gatherers. But back then, you have this idea where you have hunters and gatherers, and the thought process is believed like, well, why do I go hunt, deer or something hard to hunt? It takes me a while. When, hey, there's a bunch of goats down there. I can just go grab one. They won't mind. I'll just go grab one. Of course, that ticks off the cities and the civilization of the people raising those domesticated animals. And so you get this idea of just, they start protecting themselves. Hunters and gatherers realize, oh, this is harder to get. But that's still so much food that's just right there. And so you get hunters and gatherers starting to band together. It's all about survival. And thus starts this whole concept of barbarian hordes. So you have civilization trying to keep what they have, doing what they do, some sort of ordered society. Then you have the barbarians out there that are always just trying to steal our stuff. Barbarians isn't, by the way, a term we get from the Sumerians. It's actually an ancient Greek term, but I'm about to segue too much. I'm going to go away from that, but hopefully that just makes sense in just a simple manner. We have civilized societies, and then all of a sudden these barbarian hordes are starting up. So you need to defend yourselves from them. Now, over time, it's not like these hordes just stay hordes of people. They learn. They establish more cities themselves. Like, well, if it's hard for us to go down and get their stuff because they're so organized, they have good militaries in place, well, why don't we just move up the river a little bit and establish our own city? And that is what happens over time, and I'll get to that in a little bit. That's like kind of where the Akkadians come in once we get to the Akkadians. But these initial cities, they treated themselves kind of like an elite country club, meaning that they didn't let anybody else join. So when you do have other cities starting up, no one else can come down and join in. They're not allowed to. It's kind of like, screw you, you can't come and play in our reindeer games type stuff. That does come back to bite them over time. Now, but that is the reason for the beginning of the first civilization, is mutual trade and protection. Now, the picture I'm showing here is an example of the city-state of Ur, and here's one that looks more like a photograph of what it might have looked like. That looks large, it's not. For those of you familiar with just the size of Lehigh, or Lehigh High School, that fits roughly in about the same city block that is Lehigh High School itself. It is very tiny compared to what we think of as cities, what cities are today. Excuse me. It's just small. Like, not many people live in the cities. Throughout most of history, and most definitely in this time, most everybody, 99.9% of people live out in the countryside. They're out farming, they're out herding, they're doing what they need to do to basically be contributing members to society to survive in a civilized society. Not many people live here. You have some of your government officials, you have some of your religious officials, you have some merchants or middlemen that we talked about in class. In the earlier lesson when we talked about characteristics of civilization. But that's about it. You get a few others here and there, some skilled artisans and whatnot, but that's about it. Now, that picture right there is of what Ur looks like today. And notice you still have the famous Ziggurat standing, or the Ziggurat of Ur, one of the older buildings, in our history, one of the older still standing buildings in our history. Just a bit of a closer up. This is a Ziggurat today if you're able to go visit it, and here's an artist rendition of it. Now, it is interesting to note, and we haven't gotten our lessons on Egypt yet, but you do get this step process of building, and it's interesting. You could ask the question, well, did Egypt get knowledge of how to build pyramids from the Sumerians, or vice versa, depending on when these were all built? And as far as what I understand, it's just coincidental. This whole idea of a step process of, like, okay, if you want a big building, just large foundation and just kind of step it up. That's how the Egyptians built their very first pyramid, and that's how the Sumerians built their ziggurat here. And again, as far as we understand, it's coincidental. One didn't teach the other as far as we know. Now, what I'm going to get into here is just initial technologies you see of the Sumerians. I hope this is just simple. It is just simple, what you're looking at here. But what I'm going to go into right now is showing how each one of these technologies the Sumerians developed still impact us today. Meaning that, we still have them. They're still around. We just have more evolved forms of them, or just we have better versions of what you see here. But they still effectively serve the same purpose for an organized society. So, first off, the idea of the wagon wheel. Now, yes, we are not really sure when the wheel was fully invented. At least I've never seen anybody put a date on this is how far back the wheel was invented. It's just understood that no one really knows. It just came up at some point. But when you say the utilization of the wheel for, say, a wagon, well, we see the Sumerians as the first people ever to do that. What you see there is a war chariot, what's believed to be a war chariot from Sumerian times. And then here's the idea of an ox cart. And so we see effectively these two purposes for what you're seeing here, like a wheel with an axle with the idea of carrying stuff. It's used for war purposes, and it's used for transportation purposes, or war and transportation purposes of people, you could say. And then the transportation of goods. If I can get more stuff to market, I can sell more, therefore I am better off. My standard of living goes up. And that hasn't changed much today. We see this all the time when we're driving around. Big, huge semi-trucks filled with goods to deliver to whatever stores they're going to. Thinking of big stores like Target and Walmart and stuff like that, or Costco. But even just the idea of getting into distributors to get to all the other stores in our areas. This is how we get them around. We still use this idea of wheels on a big wagon to carry it around. Just much more effective today. For military use, there's tons of things I can put up there, but simply put, an armored vehicle, still the same purpose of a war chariot from way back when, from Sumerian days. But then there's also the idea of entertainment. And I just like throwing this up there because, well, they're fun. If you've ever had the chance to go see a monster truck rally, well, they're just fun. Or demolition derby. That's definitely big here in Utah. And yes, they are quite fun to go to. And I'm definitely positive, I should say for sure, I'm pretty dang positive that in Sumerian times they probably did stuff for fun as well. They came up with certain things that were just entertaining. I don't know of any, but it wouldn't surprise me if we found out something there. Now, going into the arch. It's known the Sumerians are the first people to utilize the arch, and it's simple there, and we see things like that. I mean, we have arches in our homes all over the place. But today we get some pretty huge modern uses out of it. Yes, those are much bigger and better and just more wow factor buildings than what the Sumerians built way back when. But the concept of the arch and the use of it, well, it's the same, just taken to the upteenth degree in modern uses today. You could say it's thanks to the Sumerians we're able to build stuff like that, because they're the ones that introduced the whole concept of the arch. Now, this is something that really hasn't changed much over time. We still have pottery classes here in the high school or in schools around the world, but the function of what you make, again, hasn't changed much. We use it as essentially dinnerware to put plants in. A host of things, again, yeah, it looks better, and we've used maybe some other materials like porcelain, but the functionality hasn't really changed from 6,000 years ago until today. It's still simple to have a nice plate in front of you, a bowl for your stuff, a cup for drinking, and utensils. Like, those have not really changed over time. Now the sundial. This is a big one. Being able to effectively use your time. When the first sundial came out, the main idea was, okay, when do we know the sun's going to come up, and when is it going to go down? Which means, how much time do I have in the day to go out and farm? How much time do I have in the day to be productive? And today we pretty much do the same thing with time. We have the whole idea of time zones. We understand that we have so much time in certain areas of the world based off of the rotation of the Earth. Here in North America, at least in more in the northern part of North America, say Utah, Idaho, Washington, states like that. In the wintertime, our days are shorter. In the summertime, our days are much, much longer. Knowing this allows us to more effectively utilize our daytime. Although the invention of the light bulb and electricity has really helped us in just utilizing time in general, even when it's dark outside. But think about how much they didn't have that 6,000 years ago in Sumerian times, 4,000 to 6,000 years ago in Sumerian times. And when it got dark, just dark. You weren't going to be able to find your way home very well, fairly dangerous. So you need to know when you got to start heading home, but you also want to stay out as long as possible to produce as much as you possibly can. And that's a big deal. But again, back then, they did have concepts of like hours. Today we got this whole idea of like milliseconds. We can judge in between like who crossed the finish line first in the Olympic Games or track and field or swimming or stuff like that. In class I like to use the example of just pointing out how many people have been looking at the clock behind me, just like, hey, when's Mr. Harrison going to shut up? He only has so long to talk and then I'm out of here. But we know that that's it because we put our time into those effective categories, saying this time is for this time is for this. I need to be done at this time. I need to get up at this time. This will take me roughly 5 minutes. It'll take me 15 minutes to travel. Like, we are able to be so much more effective and efficient with our with what we do in our day because we're able to utilize time in such a manner. Oh, sorry about that. Now, the next thing, the calendar system. Now, earlier it said the 12-month calendar. That was incorrect, by the way, and you can fix your notes if you'd like to. 12-month calendar is what we use today, and yes, our 12-month calendar today is based off of the original Sumerian 10-month calendar. As far as I understand, the way it goes is like the evolution of calendars or the transference of calendars across peoples and civilizations. You have the Sumerian calendar. Goes into or combines with the Egyptian calendar, which influences the Greek calendar, which influences the Roman calendar, and our calendar today is basically influenced by the Greco-Roman calendars, as far as my understanding. But it does start with the Sumerian calendar, again, where they realize, okay, we have so much time in a day, but it's also good to measure time, like, okay, when are we planting versus when it's going to come about the time when we know we need to harvest. We can gauge what we're doing in between. Can we do a building project in between that? Because we don't need as many people in the fields maintaining the fields, but then we'll need everybody in the fields to be harvesting, because that's the most important thing at the time. Like most kingdoms and civilizations throughout history would base everything off of planting season and harvest season. You do not interrupt that. You even stop wars during that time period, unless the war is really bad and the whole purpose of the war, destruction of, well, if you're one side trying to destroy another side, it's like get them during their harvest season. You can mess them up if you get them during harvest season, or steal their food during harvest season. You gauge a lot of things around that, and all decisions kind of went around those two things. Today, this hasn't changed that much. We have days, months, years. The big change is during the Roman times with the addition of the months of July and August because of Augustus, basically creating the months of July and August in honor of Julius Caesar and Augustus, or in himself, Augustus Caesar. But the functionality of it really hasn't changed. I mean, we can follow along better with our modern day calendars. I definitely can't read that Sumerian calendar. I'm just trusting that is a Sumerian calendar from my textbooks, or my own basically research in my own books, and then on the internet and things like that. So I'm assuming whoever put that on there knows what they're doing, or else I guess I look a little bit foolish. But again, the functionality just hasn't changed too much. Now next up, the number system. The Sumerians are the ones that came up with the idea of counting, most likely addition and subtraction. There is the Sumerian number system, again, as far as I understand. And today, it's turned into pretty much what we use for everything. And I do mean everything. Just the fact that you can be watching this video right now really just translates down to a bunch of ones and zeros in your computer. That it's just, well, as far as the way it's explained to me as best as possible is your CPU, or your core processing unit, uses that, or crunches it all down, is able to spit it out in a way of what you see right here, but it really is broken down to ones and zeros, as far as I understand. Then you have the idea of quantum physics at the bottom, but that is the modern use of the number system we get Sumerians. We just use it a heck of a lot better than they ever did, but we're at least a little bit thankful that they had it in place. Now, the last thing, bronze tools. This again is something that hasn't, well, what we make it out of is a lot better than bronze, but effectively a tool set is a tool set. Yeah, we have better tools, we have more tools made, we have tools that fit certain situations that we've created for us, like Allen wrenches and things like that. But the concept of like just a hammer, chisel, an axe, even the idea of like pliers and stuff like that, that's been around for a very, very long time. We have just changed the materials they're made out of, or made them a little bit more effective there, but it's still the same functionality. So at least going over this is the main thing I like to show, is that with the very first civilization we get some things put in place that we're still in use today. That we're still using today, we just have better versions of it. So with that being said, I'm going to end the video at this point. We're not getting to the Akkadians and to the Babylonians. I'll save both of those for the next and last video lesson for this unit.